So today's topic is we're gonna do 3 exercises that will improve shoulder mobility. You're gonna need a couple pieces of equipment, and I'm going to explain why our shoulders are so vital when it comes to movement. If you haven't subscribed to my YouTube channel, please do so by either hitting the show notes if you're listening to this, or if you are watching this, just hitting the subscribe button wherever it is on your phone, laptop, whatever it is. First and foremost, if you have a painful shoulder, go fucking see somebody. That's like rule number 1. But for some reason in the gym community, it's like, oh, my shoulder hurts or this hurts. I'm just gonna wait it out and see if it gets better. And then a couple weeks go by, they're like, it's a little bit better, so I'm just gonna not address this at all. And then a couple months down the road, it's like, okay, shit, my shoulder really fucking hurts. I really need to go see somebody. So if you have pain, go see somebody. Number 2, when it comes to shoulder mobility, there's a lot that influences it, but we're gonna kind of look at the most common kind of themes that I see in clinic and with my clients. So number 1 is going to be T-spine mobility. If your thoracic spine, which is this guy up here, kind of where your collarbone is down to where your diaphragm is, that's your T-spine. If that does not move well, your shoulders are going to move terribly. So your T-spine is a section of your body that should be super mobile. Our T-spine mobility definitely suffers, and then other joints or other segments in our body tend to take the grunt of the work, aka your shoulder and your low back. Hence why a lot of times when you kind of evaluate the patients that you see in a clinic setting, it's usually sore neck, sore shoulder, sore low back, sore hips. One of those 4 I think I just listed. If we can get our T-spine moving more effectively, especially when it comes to extension and also rotation, both left and right, then things start to move better at the shoulder. So the analogy, if I am a typical person where I have my shoulders here because I'm doing this all day, and then I go to the gym in this posture and I try to lift my arms up, this is usually all I can get to. Like, this does not feel good. And our bodies are really good at cheating movement. So what happens is our body will give us fake range of motion to allow you to, say, do a shoulder press, because that's usually what happens. So say as I am lifting, well, in that posture, I'm lifting my arms up, can't get there. Body goes, let me give you more extension through your lumbar spine, and now you can press. And you can already see, like, my chest is super flared up, and you see this a lot. Like, you might even notice it yourself in the gym when you are pressing overhead, especially when you get into like the last couple reps. If you are doing 12, 8, whatever it is, and you're starting to fatigue, the rib flare starts to happen to give you more overhead mobility. But in a sense, you want this to come down in order to stay neutral and kind of stacked and be more in a joint centrated position. The first thing that we're going to look at for developing more T-spine mobility is 3 exercises for T-spine mobility, and then we're going to do 2 more things for the shoulder specifically, and a couple more things for the shoulder. So really this title of this video is going to be like 3 exercises to improve your shoulder mobility, but really it's going to be like 9 or 10 or even 12. What we're going to do first is 3 T-spine mobility exercises that, 1, should be done on a daily basis, or at least every time you do a warm-up. First 3 exercises that need to be done on a daily basis for better thoracic mobility. The first one is a T-spine extension. For this one, you essentially need just a foam roller. And the reason why I like the thoracic extension exercise is that because we are in such, rounded positions all day, it just naturally will feel good to be in an extended position. But again, there's a couple caveats to that, because kind of what I was talking about earlier with our rib cage kind of flaring, you'll see what I mean with this. So with thoracic extension, 1, I'm placing the roller in the middle of my back and not my low back. Couple reasons why. We're trying to target our thoracic spine and not our lumbar spine. So that's number 1. Number 2, you don't have any ribs supporting your lumbar spine, so you end up just placing the freaking roller on your kidneys, and that doesn't feel good. Find kind of the middle position of your thoracic spine with your roller. And before you even start going into extension, what I want you to do is having your hands behind your head to support your neck, because it takes a lot of neck stability to actually just hold it here, and after a while it's going to fatigue pretty quickly. So hands are behind the head. I'm going to take a deep breath in. I'm going to exhale, and as I exhale, you'll notice that my rib cage naturally just falls down. I always cue that with any of my clients or patients to find a neutral position with their ribs. From there, I tell them, try to keep that position, and what we're going to do is slowly extend back with the spine, making sure my ribs don't overly arch and I'm not going through my low back. So trying to keep this neutral. I'm going to extend back and then come forward like a mini crunch. I'm going to do this a couple times, and then from there I'm going to roll up a little bit. What you'll notice right away is when we get up a little bit higher, it's going to feel a lot easier to extend back, because again, right over here, right at the beginning section of your rib cage, there's not a lot of musculature, and it's kind of at that tipping point where it's going to feel like it's too much. So as we get higher and we have more tissue to support our weight, it's going to feel a little bit easier. So same cue again, deep breath in, exhale, let the ribs fall, support the neck, and then we're extending and then going forward, back and forth. From there, one more time, I like to do 3 sections. So again, we're here, same idea. Extend and then come forward. Extend and come forward. Sometimes, because everyone's a little bit different, there's so many different T-spine rotational exercises out there, but the particular reason why I always fall into the open book is because it is a passive-like exercise where gravity does its job, or as something active, you're limited with your active range of motion, whereas in this case, you have a little bit more of a passive feel to it. So again, you're going to use your foam roller. I'm going to be lying down on my left side. My roller's in front of me. My top leg is going to go on top of the roller. So in this position, I'm going to try to go on a 45. I'm here. I'm going to have my left hand drive down onto the knee. This knee is never going to come off the roller. And if it does, I'm going to be cheating in the sense that I'm using lumbar rotation to make up for the lack of T-spine rotation. So this knee is going to be glued to the roller as hard as possible. And I always tell people to actively push down to create tension, to purposefully have this down. Your other hand is going to reach forward as far as possible. So I'm already rotating forward, and previously when I used to coach the open book, I would just start here and then open up, but I've been adding this forward rotation, and sometimes I can get a little pop or crack through the T-spine just doing this. And then from here, deep breath in, I'm going to exhale and open up across the body. And there's a couple things here. You can either have your hand come straight across, but I also like bending it, because a lot of times, again, this is from a clinical standpoint, is a lot of times when people have T-spine limitations, their traps and neck are super tight. So doing this, what usually happens, so imagine I am rotating across my body and I can't get my shoulder all the way down to the ground. What ends up happening is this position, and a lot of times when people have a tight T-spine, their neck is also kind of jammed up. This motion, like already right now, my fingers are starting to get a little tingly, and what I'm doing is just placing a lot of stress on my brachial plexus, which is a series of nerves kind of bundled together that run from the neck down into the arm. So that's why I like going into this bent position. So as I rotate, I kind of bend and look in that direction. The next thing is going to be an active component when it comes to T-spine rotation. And one of the ones that I really enjoy, that I feel like I might have actually invented, because I haven't seen it, I feel like I might have actually coined this one myself, because I have not seen this in the FRC/Kinstretch community just yet. So I came up with this concept teaching the T-spine CARs. In order to get this right, what I like to do is go into a tall kneeling position. My knees are wider than my hips, and it's on purpose. So in a wider position, I'm going to be able to eliminate lumbar movement as much as possible. I have my toes tucked under and digging into the ground, and I'm squeezing my glute as hard as possible to get into more hip extension. I'm taking my little yoga block here and kind of giving it a bear hug, and with my fingertips, as you can see, I'm pulling it across to create tension. From here, I'm taking a deep breath in, and on the exhale, I'm gonna rotate to one side. As I'm rotating, I'm squeezing glutes on both sides as hard as possible and digging my toes into the ground. And as I get to my end range, I actually feel a nice stretch through my hip flexor, literally almost like from the insertion down into my hip. Sorry, from the origin into the insertion as I'm rotating. So if we all know, a lot of low back pain comes from tight ass hip flexors. So I'm kind of killing two birds with one stone. As I'm working actively for my T-spine rotation, I'm also stretching out my hip flexor. And I'm just going back and forth, nice and slow, getting that T-spine moving. So those three are my kind of go-tos, or what I think of when it comes to kind of like a priority list in creating functional, I have to use that in air quotes, T-spine mobility. Now, the next two that we're gonna get into is for shoulder external rotation and internal rotation, and we're gonna do some pails and rails in this. So if you remember from my other video, we were talking about this whole concept of pails and rails, where we're creating an external load by using an isometric contraction to influence tissue change, to give it information that I'm trying to create more freedom of motion and more control in these end ranges that I have, and I need to improve my end range in order to better my mobility, and in this case it's the shoulder. If you look at external rotation of the shoulder, so I'm going to take my shoulder into abduction and external rotation. When I get to my end range, what happens is I arch to fake external rotation. So we're going to take your shoulder into your end range and do pails and rails there. You're going to need a dowel, broomstick, Swiffer, whatever you have, but it has to be strong enough where you can do a little force into it. So I'm going to be in a half kneeling position. I have my right knee down. So with the dowel, I'm going to have it on my side, and I'm going to place my hand around it and kind of swoop it around. So now I have my shoulder in abduction and external rotation, but I don't feel a stretch yet. So how I do that, I take the dowel and drive it forward, and now you can see my hand is more further behind me into external rotation. If I still don't feel it, I can go a little bit further, and I think around there is where I feel a pretty good stretch, kind of like in the back of my shoulder and wrapped around the front. The biggest mistake I see is when people do this, they have their shoulder too far forward and they're like, I don't feel it. You need your shoulder out to the side like you're doing a dumbbell overhead press with a dumbbell. Holding this position for 2 minutes, just like before when we did our hips. At the top of the 2 minutes, we're going to do something called a pails contraction, where I'm going to take my hand and push it into the dowel as hard as possible without the dowel moving forward. So I'm going to pinpoint the dowel where it is in that position, because that's my end range, and I'm driving my hand forward into the dowel. The big difference with our shoulders compared to our hips is that this is a smaller, I wouldn't say a smaller joint, but it has smaller muscles surrounding the joint. So compared to our hips, where we have some pretty big players when it comes to doing pails and rails, you can like really give her. Whereas I find with shoulders, if I like go as hard as possible right off the bat, it's not going to feel good on my shoulders. So I'm going to slowly push, kind of putting my foot on the gas pedal. So when I get to that 10th second, that's where I'm kind of going as hard as possible. So after 10 seconds, you'll notice that you've communicated to your nervous system. You could probably go a little bit further. And then from this position, I'm going to do my rails contraction, where I'm going to think of driving my wrist down to the ground off the dowel. If I'm actually at my end range, my hand, my wrist is not coming off the dowel. If I cheated and just stayed here the whole time, yeah, no problem, I can get my hand back there. So you need to get to a position where it's physically impossible to get your hand off it, but you're still activating all that stuff back there to influence all the musculature that requires for shoulder external rotation. From there, we're gonna work on internal rotation for pails and rails. In this position, this is the kind of like the old school sleeper stretch. I'm going to start by lying down. We are going to have my left shoulder bent at 90. I'm gonna take my right hand onto my left wrist and I'm gonna push it down into internal rotation. The only way for you to cheat on this is if one, you have already a really good mobility, or you like end up pushing your hand out this way, because that doesn't do anything. But if I go right at 90 degrees with my arm and go down straight into a line, now I feel a stretch in my left shoulder. Again, holding for 2 minutes. In this position, my neck already doesn't feel good, so I can use that yoga block that I had and use that as a little pillow. As I'm holding, I'm breathing every exhale. I'm trying to like get deeper into the stretch. At that 2 minute mark, I'm going to show this with the fist and my right hand straight out so you can have a better visual. When I am pressing down for my pales contraction, I'm going to further press down as hard as possible, and then with my left hand that's in the fist, I'm going to fight it to create that isometric contraction. After 10 seconds, you'll notice that you'll be able to go a little bit further, and then from here, without pushing with my right hand that's straight out, I'm going to take my hand where my fist is and try to push it down actively off that hand to kind of create that regressive angular isometric contraction for shoulder internal rotation. Now that we have all that new required range, the biggest component of pails and rails is that you've opened up new lines of tissue, you turned off that emergency brake of your nervous system, and you now need to challenge that new range to keep it. So one of the two best ways of doing that is doing shoulder CARs and scapular CARs. So shoulder CARs in general, there's so many different variations, but the one that I like to use that I have bigger, just some more success with, is going 2 arms at the same time. So in my Kinstretch class, I like doing it in a seated position because there's less chance of hip movement and things like that. And you can do this literally in like a butterfly stretch, in a bear pose, a deep squat position if you really want to challenge yourself. But for the sake of this video and the difficulty where everyone can start is just in a seated position. And while you're here, it'll be nice and tall. So you're gonna start with both hands with fists in front, kind of just hanging out on the top of your shins. We're gonna come up as high as possible to shoulder flexion. And from here, in your end range, you're gonna start rotating your fists inwards. As I'm doing that, I'm trying to get behind me with my arms as far back as possible, and I'm still rotating. So if you look at my right wrist that I'm moving right now, I'm constantly rotating into internal rotation, which we just did, until I have my hands down onto the ground. I know you can't see it, but my hands are literally just on the ground into internal rotation. And then I'm going to come back and I'm still internal rotating. I'm now externally rotating just like we did before with the dowel until I come back all the way forward and down. Now with the shoulder CAR, it's kind of one of those exercises that covers all bases. It covers all the movement patterns that your shoulder can do, and after doing pails and rails, that's like literally one of the best things that you can do. The next thing is now scapular CARs. A lot of people have no idea how to interdependently move their scapulas than like moving their entire shoulder together. And when that scap can't move, glide, and everything like that properly, then that glenohumeral joint within your shoulder is not going to function properly. And then you have like a clusterfuck of stuff happening, and no wonder you have shoulder pain. So step 1 is doing scapular push-ups. So the biggest thing that I see with scapular push-ups, if I'm in a quadruped position, I don't understand why people go into a push-up position to do this when they have no business being there. So everyone should start in a quadrupedal position. So from here, you're gonna squeeze the shoulder blades together and then push them away. The biggest mistake I see people do is even before they move, they do this. They're in this low back arch position and then they're trying to do this, right? You need to find neutral first and then go back and forth. The other issue that I see a lot is people's elbows bending, and as they're trying to go down, because they don't know how to retract their scapulas properly. From there, what I like to do is create scapular circles where you're actually putting your scapula through all the different motions that it can go through. So in that same position, you're going to think of drawing circles with your shoulders. Again, biggest mistake people do is as they're trying to draw that circle, they're pushing their hips back because they have no idea how to actually do this. Right? This should be a natural position for your shoulder blades to go through, but because people don't know how to move their shoulder blades, other parts of their body kind of make up for it. Now, after you do a couple of these, you need to challenge yourself and go in the opposite direction. Same idea, when people try to go in that opposite direction where you're driving your shoulders forward, they end up moving their whole body to compensate. I see this over and over and over again in my classes that I teach for Kimstretch, and you know, these people, when I chat with them after class, they'll have experiences with shoulder pain, and I'm like, if your shoulder blade can't move, then it can't glide on your T-spine properly, and now your glenohumeral joint can't go above the head. So that was a lot. Definitely lied about the whole title of 3 exercises that are going to improve your shoulder mobility. It was a lot. So we had 3 T-spine mobility exercises. We had pails and rails for shoulder external rotation, pails and rails for internal rotation. We had shoulder CARs, and then we had scapular CARs. So we had 7 exercises today. How you can implement these. You can put them in your warm-up. You can do them daily as like a movement routine, or you can throw them literally in your workout. So a lot of different options. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. If you haven't hit that subscribe button, do it now so you can see more videos. And if you are listening, hit the show notes, watch the video, subscribe, add me on Facebook, add me on Instagram. That's it for me. Until next time, you guys, thank you. I love you guys.